we saw the leaves fall off the trees in the summer, and there were certain tree species that were vulnerable to this. And it was after a heavy rain, and like the Department of Natural Resources said, of course, they blamed a mold or a fungus that was causing it, but that wasn't the appearance of these leaves at all. They were like completely dried out, like desiccated, and they looked like they were burned, like chemically burned. Like they weren't reduced to ash, but they were disfigured and discolored as if, some caustic substance interacted with them. Totally different from, when you see fungus on plants. It's generally like they're very moist. You can see the fuzz of or black mold or a fungus, growing on it. And I suspect that, they were dropping something or putting it into the air some way that was directly toxic to the trees.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Dr. Andrew, how the heck are you, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, I have to say.
Life's treating you well?
Well, no, not necessarily, but it's not fazing me.
Okay. Well, I want to just have a candid conversation with you. It's been a while. I looked back on our first episode. I was like, gosh, that was, it's been a year and a half.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's insane how fast it goes by.
Only when you look back.
Right. Only when you look back. So I wanted to sit down and have a conversation with you because I watched a documentary about chemtrails, and you were in this documentary, and I was sitting with my wife. I'm like, hey, there's Dr. Andrew, who's on our podcast, and I'm friends with him, and so I had to puff myself up a little bit, and it was, but it was a lot of fun, and so many people. It's comical to me because I get in this topic and feel like, oh, those are contrails, and it just baffles my brain. So we don't have to just dive into chemtrails, but I think it'd be fun just to have a good opener, and really, if someone says, Andrew, those are contrails, what is your response?
Well, I mean, I try not to get into a lot of conversations, with people who aren't already open to the truth about these things.
Maybe that's my problem.
So that, that's one thing, but also like, obviously they're not, it's not contrails because contrails fade very quickly. They don't stay in the sky. And, we can all remember growing up that we never saw what we see today in the sky. Now, I do definitely not love the term chemtrails because I don't think we really know what's going on up there. And, Sean definitely did a great film. And the idea really is to just open people up that the weather is being manipulated in a variety of ways and that the skies definitely don't look like they did. But what exactly is the technology that they're using? How are they doing it? We don't really know all the answers to that, but we need to find out, right? So it's important to generate interest in this topic and encourage people to look into it. And, over time, we'll be able to hopefully, figure it out and stop the powers that be from doing this.
So I have a Nikon P1000. Have you heard of the conspiracy around this camera?
I know all about the camera. I mean, they took it off the market, but I understand they're making it again or something comparable to it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I know nothing of cameras, but they took this camera off the market, and I said I need that camera, And so I called around all these camera shops, and I got a camera, and I'm in a group chat with a bunch of guys, and
You probably paid a premium to get a used one if you did it when it was off the market, huh?
I honestly I caught wind of it right when I heard news of this camera, and I bought it before the craze, before the price went up. So
Oh, good for you.
I got a very reasonable deal. In fact, when I went to go get this camera, the guy at the store said, "What's the deal with this camera? I've had like 5 phone calls in 2 days about this camera." And I said, "Let me tell you." And I said, NASA, Nikon, there's a conspiracy. They discontinued this camera. They don't want the peasants to own this camera. And so I said, I need it. I need this camera. I've taken pictures of the moon, and it's unbelievable. But I got to tell you, I'm in a group chat with these guys that are all like-minded. And this guy posted a picture of this plane, and it was a chemtrail. And he's like, "Look." And I said, "Dude," and he's like, "This is for my Nikon P1000. I said, "You have a Nikon P1000? He's like, "Yes." And then we instantly became best friends. But then I said, I want to get together, and I want to try to film some of these planes with this camera. And he's been doing that. And he claims to think that they're all Southwest. A lot of them are Southwest Airlines that are doing this, which is interesting, because if what a way to keep it under our noses if it really is Southwest they're doing this.
Well, it's got to be more than that, because they don't really fly in my geographic area, but we still have, the same phenomenon. So maybe they have regional contracts. But like I said, it's hard to say what it is that you're seeing coming out of those planes and what's the purpose of it. And but obviously it's something different, and it's something worrisome.
Right. I mean, we have the aluminum. The thing that was most convincing is the gentleman that was measuring the aluminum levels. I believe it was on the mountainside in the snow, just over the last. I mean, he's had a long history of aluminum levels, and it was hardly anything parts per million. And then all of a sudden, in the last decade, has skyrocketed. And you look at all our neurological issues now more than ever before. We have, I think vaccines play a role, but also.
Well, what neurologic issues are you talking about?
I'm talking, neurological degeneration. I'm talking demyelination. All these issues that we have. Look at all.
You sure those things are increasing? I haven't really looked at it. I mean, clearly autism has been increasing like crazy, but and childhood developmental disorders.
Look at Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is, they're saying that, by 2050, 1 out of 2 people have Alzheimer's. So we have a massive, I think autism and Alzheimer's are almost parallel on the same graph. If you look at in the last 30, 40 years, would you agree with Alzheimer's? You don't think Alzheimer's is increasing?
No. I said that's interesting. I haven't, like I said, I haven't really looked at it, to be honest with you. So, but it certainly would make sense.
Right. But I even think that, you see in the children, the neurological developmental delays. So when I say like neurological, even the children, I think vaccinations have a role in that. But, and I think that.
Well, they give a lot of vaccinations to old people too. They have extra ones, right, for the elderly, like the pneumovax and the shingles vaccine and things like that.
Right.
So, it's definitely worth looking at that too. I mean, I don't, I'm not sure where that aluminum is coming from. Like, is it coming, because it could be coming from other sources of pollution, as well as that. It's really difficult to tell. Cliff Carnicom did some interesting research related to this out in California, where he basically set up an air sampler, which was just a clean HEPA filter. And he ran it on days where there were clearly a lot of trails in the sky. And then he ran it on other days that were clear as a controls. And then he measured the amount of various elements in the filter.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do no harm approach. At Ezra Healing, your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now, back to the show.
Right, because that's essentially just comes from the air. So that's an experiment that gives you more specific data, right? If you just measure it in the ground, in the soil or the water, you don't know where it comes from. Like especially if in a water source, because a lot of companies may dump effluent waste into there, right? So this actually, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm arguing that something nefarious is going on in the sky or that there's, strategic weather manipulation. But I think that some of the people in this space have not really done the due diligence of getting proper data to show what's what.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's interesting though, the concept of the air, because I think that's where we need to go. I think that's a valid point. And
Right. I mean, I also have seen like strange, like defoliation events. A couple of winters ago, it was like in the early winter, late fall, I believe, or maybe it was in the middle of the winter. We had this period that was warmer and it was raining, and no, I'm sorry, I'm totally confused. It was in the summer. We saw the leaves fall off the trees in the summer, and there were certain tree species that were vulnerable to this, and it was after a heavy rain, and like the Department of Natural Resources said, of course they blamed a mold or a fungus that was causing it, but that wasn't the appearance of these leaves at all. They were like completely dried out, like desiccated, and they looked like they were burned, like chemically burned, like they weren't reduced to ash, but they were disfigured and discolored as if they some caustic substance interacted with them. Totally different from when you see fungus on plants. It's generally like they're very moist. You can see the fuzz of the or black mold or a fungus growing on it. And I suspect that they were dropping something or putting it into the air some way that was directly toxic to the trees and cause this like exfoliation. And obviously, if we can go back and there's known chemicals that do this, right? I mean, that's what Agent Orange was, right? That's what Roundup is. So I can't explain that, but there are a lot of mysterious events like this, and we can look at the health of the forests as one indicator that there's some source of being poisoned.
I mean, there's no way escaping it, and it just makes my brain just boggled, because if there are people behind this doing this, I mean, aren't they exposed to this as well, right? And how are they?
Well, that is one of the things that seems odd, but perhaps they have a way of protecting themselves and their property from this. Like, so maybe they strategically live in certain areas, or with respect to health, it's easy to avoid a lot of them. You stay away from the allopathic healthcare system. You avoid processed food. You make sure that your chef sources clean, whole food for you. And actually met someone who was earlier in his career an executive chef for some very wealthy people that had him on salary, and he interestingly told me that the most time consuming part of his job was sourcing the food ingredients, that he was sourcing them the highest quality, this and that, from all over the world, and they would be like drop shipped, and it was cost a fortune. Like, I think he said it was more than his salary, like to get the supplies this way. So to me, that indicates, right, that they know what is safe to put in their body, and they're going to great expense and inconvenience to obtain that, perhaps to avoid what all of the the low people are exposed to.
I just think that it just I don't doubt that there's evil and there's evil being spread in our skies and the people are behind this, but it makes me so frustrated because it's like out of my control. How do I stop it? How do I go about doing it? I feel like it can really ruin someone's day when they look up in the sky and they see all these stinking lines in the sky. It irritates me because I'm just like, hey, I'm having a great day. I want to live my life. I'm in the I'm living life, and I see these things sprayed, and I'm just like, you know what? I know the sun's still shining. They can try to block it out, but I know it's still shining. But it really does poop on my pancakes. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah, I feel the same way.
yeah,
I've been experimenting with some, devices that allegedly can impair this issue and open up the skies around you. And it's not, for me, it's not like I'm not devoting enough time and effort to it to get to the answer fast. But I've talked to some people that, have had some results and have given me some information about, what really works. And I feel confident that I'm going to get there, and I'll definitely be happy to share that
yeah,
information once I have achieved success. But there are definitely some people out there that are, claiming, including one of the interviewees in Sean Hibbler's film that you mentioned. I believe they show video of the skies clearing over his house.
yeah. I think yes, and I would love to have that on the roof of my home. Um,
I don't think that you put it either in or next to a body of water actually on your property.
mm, well,
So yeah, it wouldn't help to put it on the roof. It might look cool though. It'd be a
yeah.
pain to get up there.
Whatever I need to do, Doc, to break up these chemtrails. I even seen, how do I say it? I swear they're more active at night. I don't know if that's just my theory, but I feel like I've seen them more active at night because
Are you one of those who has like one of those apps that tracks air traffic?
I do have that app. Yes. Yep. Yep. So, it is fascinating, though. I mean, that's just again a conspiracy, but I swear that they are very much active at night, and I think that's another adds to the conspiracy. It raises more questions. Um, so it is interesting. Well, Doc, I wanted to one of the things I wanted to talk to you because I know we're like minded in a lot of areas, and something that I wanted to I've had a conversation with Dr. Cowan, and I love Dr. Cowan, and he's very sharp. And he was telling me that obviously we've gone down a lot of rabbit holes. I mean, with virology, and I know you're very wise in that area, and Dr. Cowan is too. He was kind of talking about how genetics, it really doesn't, like I always say, oh, I've studied in epigenetics, and and he just really didn't think. Obviously, we had the data to confirm true genetics and epigenetics in that model. Can you shine light on that?
Yeah. This is something I have spent some. I mean, I'm still investigating this rabbit hole because I haven't figured out a way to clearly explain this to people yet. Because genetics is even one of those fields within biology that biology students find confusing. But here's a couple of very interesting facts that you can look at. So one of the biggest GMO food products that's used today is citric acid. I don't know if you're personally aware of that or not, but it's used for its sour flavor and some other properties, and it's used in many foods, and of course in almost any sour tasting candy is going to have this. So kids get exposed to a lot of it, and it was one of the first quote unquote GMO products. However, the method of making this GMO product was invented in the very beginning of the 20th century, 60 or 70 years before the central dogma of genetics was fully introduced. So, in other words, they didn't do anything with genes or DNA or RNA. They hadn't even heard of those things at the time that they created a way of making GMO citric acid. And they did it by tinkering with a black mold, actually, Aspergillus nigra, and tinkering with that mold. So the mold makes a bunch of citric acid that they then harvest and purify and add to foods. And also, it's interesting to know that all or virtually all of the fruits and vegetables that we buy at the supermarket never existed in nature. They're all genetically modified organisms. Now, we know the exact method that they use because they used intensive hybridization and selective breeding to create those. But if you look, for example, at what the banana looked like before it was genetically modified, or for me, the most dramatic example is the brassica-related vegetables. So that includes, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, romescu, Brussels sprouts, and a couple more. And they all come from this plant called brassica, which is said to be a wild cabbage. But if you look at it, it's just a little twig with a couple of leaves on it. It's not a big head of, edible vegetable. And it was through, countless hundreds of generations of genetic modification that they created these things. And they didn't have any concept of genes or DNA or RNA at the time they did that, yet they still were able to do it. So when we have these GMO, crops and organisms now, we have to ask the question, do they really need all of the theory of genetics and DNA to do that because it's already been done? Or is it just some procedure that works, that changes the organism? And once they have it, they have it.
Right.
So let's look now at genetics a little bit. So one thing that I think is just really, really key, because we're all told that like the key to genetics is the gene, right? That the gene makes the gene product, which confers a function or certain characteristics to an organism. Yet there is no definition of what a gene is. So they have these things they call genes, but it's not defined what it is actually. Now let's look at the what's known as the central dogma. Okay, this is the word they officially call it in biology textbooks. Right now we know what dogma means. It doesn't mean scientific fact. It's like akin to folklore. So it's called the central dogma of biology, and it is the, hypothesis is really what I should call it, that the DNA, right, which contains the genes, gets transcribed to RNA, which then gets translated to proteins. And this is how DNA is the code or the blueprint of our life, right? Because it basically is the code to make all the proteins, and we're either made of these proteins or of products of chemical reactions that were catalyzed by protein enzymes. So in other words, the whole makeup of our body is in the genetic code for the proteins. Now this idea and all of the details associated with it, exactly how it's done in the cell with the ribosomes and the messenger RNA and the transfer RNAs, all the details that they currently would be in any biology textbook, were completely imagined by Francis Crick, okay, of Watson and Crick, who, say that they found this double helix structure. We could talk about that separately, but that's not true either. But he basically wrote a paper saying, this is how I think it all works. And then that was essentially taken as fact. And after he said that, they did some experiments that weren't really testing all of the details, but they were tangentially related. And then they just said that these experiments prove this idea. And then it's been printed in the textbooks and regarded as fact ever since that time. And the proof of it is, GMOs, right? Doing all of this essentially sorcery of mixing and matching properties of organisms in the laboratory, and saying that that's all based on genetics. But is it really, or is it just a formula of doing these things? Like when those farmers were hybridizing those plants, they had no idea what was happening inside the plant to bring about the results. They just knew if they did this, that they got a different plant that grew. And then if they liked that plant, they could accentuate it by doing more of this procedure. And so is that all that we have now that's going on with, gene technology really? And that this, dogma is really not true at all and doesn't explain anything, but it gives us a false understanding. And that it's used as a scapegoat for incurable illness all the time, right? Oh, you're sick because you have bad genes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not evidence to back that up.
Right. Bad science. Oh, tell me then. So, I mean, the whole medical establishment, the whole world thinks we're sick because of bad germs, or bad genes or bad luck. And I've always said too, that's bad science. But it's like, what are your thoughts on you have DARPA contracts back in 2012 or 2013 with Pfizer trying to come in and alter, if you look at they even said genome therapy, which is concerning to me. Excuse me. And I believe the only way, I mean, I don't know what they're doing then. I mean, what are they doing? They're playing God with their bodies, or they're attempting to. But have you heard of CRISPR, Cas9?
Yeah, of course.
And I wonder if that's what they're utilizing. I don't know. I mean, I think that they are. I saw a lot of literature talking about how, um, they want to go in and use the CRISPR in some fashion. You even see some government officials pushing that. But to me, if big pharma gets their hands on that technology, I feel like they'll be able to turn on disease and turn it off at a flip of a switch. And this industry doesn't profit when we are well; they profit when we're sick. So, do you think that this vaccine could be utilizing CRISPR, this mRNA? What are your thoughts?
So, like, let me tell you that I don't think that it works at all like they're saying that it works. Like, I
I
don't
agree.
believe they can put some synthetic genetic material in and force your body to make a specific protein. Because I just don't think it works that. There are many, limitations. I mean, this is synthetic chemicals that they're using to make these, gene therapies. But if you look back, so I actually did a required scientific paper in back in college at MIT. In order to graduate, you had to take scientific writing and write this big manuscript as part of that course. And mine was actually on gene therapy. I essentially wrote a review paper of gene therapy at the time, and we're talking about in 1991 or early 90s. Okay, so gene therapy was already an idea back then, and at that point they were struggling with just delivering the genetic molecules into cells. Okay, now supposedly that problem has been solved, but you have the company, right, Moderna, right, which really stands, right, it's got RNA in the name, right, mRNA, messenger RNA, Moderna. That's what the technology that they're supposedly using, making synthetic RNA, putting it into hosts. Now they've developed quite a number of candidate genetic therapies for actual diseases, and had no success whatsoever. All they did was spend money and lose money until the COVID opportunity. Now, so that was, according to the mainstream, the first actually success of any gene therapy. But if we look, at the data, we know it wasn't successful at all. It really just resulted in killing and injuring a lot of people. Now, did it do that by, making those people synthesize a spike protein, there's really no solid evidence of that at all. So it's just a different kind of poison. And this whole story about the power of gene therapy, that it can cure things, it can cure cancer, right? That's what when Trump had that big announcement where they were going to put all this investment in AI and such, right? What did they say? We're going to use this for genetic cancer vaccines, because that's extremely appealing to the public, right? And it gets you excited. And then you don't think, oh, this is actually just poison disguised as like some kind of powerful technology for healing.
Well, either way, it's I don't trust these people, and I feel like
as well you shouldn't.
Yeah, and I just it baffles my brain. Doc, have you seen these before? These white fibrous.
I mean, I'm not sure what I'm looking at
Sorry,
there.
that was totally left field, by the way. Sorry, that's the way my brain works. You can say I have ADD, but anyway, it's like I have this fibrous material that I got from an embalmer. I don't know if you know Richard Hirschman. He was also on one of the earlier episodes, but he was an embalmer, and he's claiming that he's pulling these from the bodies of people. And basically, he's never seen anything like this prior to the COVID vaccine. He's been doing it for almost 3 decades. And he said ever since the COVID vaccine, he's been pulling these fibrous materials out. And a lot of these. Go ahead.
Can you just describe how, like, now my understanding, of what an embalmer does is, they generally they put a cannula in, one of the major blood vessels, right? Like the subclavian or the jugular, and then they infuse embalming fluid. So how would an embalmer be pulling stuff out of a blood vessel? Like how did that come about? What's he doing in his normal job that leads to that?
So let's say he goes into an area, a vessel to put embalming fluid in, and the fluid.
But he would just be sticking a needle into the blood vessel.
Right. And he said that
he wouldn't be like dissecting it or anything.
Right. No, not dissecting, but there was an obstruction somewhere where the fluid was not basically entering the system. It was just, there was a blockage. And so they would figure out where the blockage is. He has video footage of this. Basically, to give you an idea, he was trying to put fluid in through the jugular, and basically the fluid was not coming out. And then finally, he was just pushing really hard, and all of a sudden, boom, this white fibrous thing comes flying out, and then all this fluid starts gushing out.
Wait, he's pushing in, and downstream from the pushing,
yes,
there's something, and then that something comes out where the needle is?
Well, let's say he's pushing upstream, and then something comes out down. He's got video footage. I don't know exactly all the details, but either way, he's trying to flush this embalming fluid through the body, and there's obstructions in the cardiovascular system, and then these things come out basically under enough pressure. And so I'm not an embalmer. I can't tell you all the details on how he's doing it, but he's got video footage of it. He's got, I think, over 300 documented cases of it.
Well, no, you've already provided more detail than I've ever heard about this, because any of the like interviews or documentaries that I've seen where there's been, a mortician talking about this, or even a pathologist, they never say how they obtained the samples or anything. But it makes sense if there's an obstruction. Like I imagine that there would be some people who died of an embolism, for example, where they might also experience an obstruction when they're trying to embalm them. Or maybe if they have a green field filter or something like that. Well, that may not, unless it's clotted over, but I'm sure it comes up occasionally. So that's the material that they extracted that was causing the blockage. And yes. Has that been tested to see what it is?
Basically, there's something with the amyloid protein. I don't know exactly. I just know I was very skeptical when I heard this. I was very skeptical when I saw, footage of all of this. And so I wanted to do my own research. So I called all these embalmers and I said, I was doing my own homework. I said, hi, I'm just an independent journalist trying to do some research on this topic. And I would call around and, and they'd say, oh, that's an anti-vaccine conspiracy. But about 60% of the people I talked to said, yes, I've never seen anything like this. One in particular said, yes, I've seen this and I'm not allowed to talk to you, and then hung up the phone, which is pretty interesting. And so then I call one of my best friends up in South Dakota, and he was telling me that his uncle's an embalmer, and he's been doing it for 30 years. And the one thing that convinced me is when I talked to Richard Hirschman, who was in the Died Suddenly documentary we're basically been pulling these out. He said that these have the consistency of a rubber band. Now, clots or postmortem clots will dissolve, as you know, like grape jelly. And he said these have a consistency of a rubber band. And then I talked to my best friend's uncle, and he said the same thing. He said, I'm looking at one right now. He actually sent me a picture of one. And he said, I've never seen this prior to the rollout of the COVID vaccine. And these have the consistency of a rubber band. That was it. I was sold. I was like, okay, well, what better material to make for a cardiovascular obstruction, make it like a rubber band. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, one thing is I want to know, what it's made of. Like, when I've heard about this, it seemed to me like it would be most likely to be made of fibrin, right, which is the protein that actually forms blood clots. And there are some types of clots that are white like that. So there's and I've mentioned this several times on this topic, but not in talking to you necessarily, but there's something called HIT-HAT or white clot syndrome, and it's a side effect of heparin exposure. And heparin is used a lot in the hospital. It's used prophylactically for clots. And I'm not sure if these folks were exposed to heparin before their death, because it can cause a condition that's similar to DIC, where you get essentially white blood clots throughout the vascular system, arterial and venous. And it could be very lethal because it obstructs flow and resulting in death. Now, it's a relatively rare condition, but I would, definitely want to look into that, because it's a known substance that can cause this thing, provided that they're, made of fibrin. And if they're made of amyloid, then that's, you see amyloid in like degenerative disease, right? Like in dementia that you're mentioning, you can find amyloid plaques in the brain. There's something called amyloidosis, which is essentially where your organs get infiltrated with amyloid plaque, and they just drop off in function until they die and you die.
So with the clots, white forming clots, though, would they still have the consistency of like grape jelly? Would they?
No, they wouldn't. When a clot forms, there's a whole bunch of different things that happen, right? At first, there's a platelet plug. Then you start getting the polymerization of fibrin. Then you get the fibrin cross-linking and such. So the clot becomes organized over time. Now, the post-mortem or with blood in a vial, I don't know that it actually has the time or the conditions to fully organize. So it makes those softer, like gelatinous, so, that whenever we have bleeding and blood collects or pools outside of the body, we see that jelly type of stuff. And that may be typically what happens to the intravascular blood after, death, because, the cells in the body are no longer alive. So they're not doing any action, right, to make a proper platelet plug and such like that. So it may just be that it's different. Like if you had someone who died of a massive pulmonary embolus, and you dissected that embolus out, that would be a blood clot. But I think it wouldn't be a jelly-like thing. It would be much more firm and rubbery. Yeah, that's my thinking anyway. I don't know that I've actually pulled one out myself, but I do remember being in some abdominal surgery I can't remember if it was for an aneurysm repair or to remove an embolism, but
So are
but
you
these would be the questions that, like obviously an embalmer doesn't really understand pathology or physiology, right? So they would basically have these observations and not be able to explain them. That it would require additional study and expertise to figure out what this is and what caused it and what's going on. Also the embalmer don't have access to the medical records. They don't know if someone's been vaccinated or not. So they might say, before COVID, I never saw this, or before the jabs were started to be given, I never saw this and I saw it after, but they don't know the status of the individual body, like if they were vaccinated or not, or how many shots they got. That would be something that should be definitely looked at.
Right, I agree.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
The fact that, he was stating that roughly at one time, it was 60 to 70% of the bodies he was embalming had these white clot obstructions. And, I didn't witness it. It's obviously his word. But the fact that other embalmers were saying something very similar at the time, it raises suspicion. And was it, like you said, they don't have records of the vaccination status. So to me, it's very interesting, and I think it needs to be investigated. But you bring up a good point. And I want to look into that. If it is amyloid, and if it is you said heparin exposure, is that right?
Yeah, it's called HIT-HAT syndrome, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, heparin-associated thrombosis. So you can actually have low platelets and blood clotting, intravascular blood clotting simultaneously.
And how does that
happen?
Happen?
Similarly to DIC, where you have bleeding and clotting simultaneously.
How does that happen, Doc?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's known. It's a fairly rare, but I learned about this from a hematologist.
Okay, so
originally, but I looked it up around this issue and you can find it. It's in the textbooks and stuff.
Well, it's interesting. I think it brings up an interesting point. But either way, another fun topic to dive into. And either way, I don't know about the spike. The talk about the spike toxin, and people talk about the nanokinase and all these different things and how it dissolves. And I even recommended that just because I just don't know. I think it's something that's it's important to look into.
Well, any protein that's in your blood is going to have a half-life, and it's going to be degraded. At some point. Nothing. No molecule lasts forever. There are things that get stored in your body for a long time, but they tend to be only fat soluble things, like, certainly alpha linoleic acid, 2.5-year half-life in your adipose tissue. And, things like PCBs and DDT are still present in people's fat tissue, even though they've been off the market for 50 years.
Well,
but not proteins. They will not last.
Right. Well, Doc, you bring a lot of wisdom. I can't believe it's been already 40 minutes. We're going to do something fun here in the last 5-10 minutes of this podcast. The last podcast here, I always like diving into conspiracies. Doc, would you consider yourself a conspiracy nut?
Haven't we been discussing conspiracies the whole time?
Well, I guess it all depends. That's a valid point. So when I say conspiracies, this is something I talk about every day. So it's part of my everyday life. So conspiracies, I would say, I even go down further the rabbit hole. So to me, this is just everyday talk. But I want to get your perspective. We're going to give you 1 minute when I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say a conspiracy, and you'll have 1 minute to answer. Okay. And I'm going to cut you off at a minute. Okay.
Are you all right? What's the question?
Well,
am I familiar with it?
Well, yeah, I'll give you, I'm going to throw a conspiracy at you, and I want you to tell me you have 60 seconds to share your thoughts. Okay. If you don't have any thoughts, you can say move on. Okay. So
Okay. All right. I like this. This is like a game show.
it is a game show. So this is what we're going to do. So I usually call this conspiracy bingo because I don't know if you know Justin Harvey from Florida, but I had a conspiracy bingo shirt because he's a big conspiracy nut. I'm like, you know what? I like this. We're just going to keep this theme going with conspiracies here. So I'm going to throw one at you. Are you ready to play?
All right. Yeah. Sounds like fun.
This is a win-win. So moon landing, was it faked?
Absolutely. Duct tape and tinfoil.
Okay. That was only 5 seconds. So you got another 50 seconds to expand.
Well, I would encourage people to look into the connection with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and the moon landing. I think that is one of the most interesting ways to look at that subject.
Okay, well said. By the way, we're parallel. I always say The Shining. That was there were some little message in that, especially with the carpet pattern and the whole signs of the kid with the Apollo 11 on the shirt. Yeah, what's that about? Okay, 9/11 inside job.
Well, I mean, yeah, who on the inside, I don't think we know, but a lot of people got rich playing the stock market. Obviously, you got the insurance policy on the buildings from, the Zionist political activist guy, Shel Silverstein, I think. You've got all the military doing exercises just at the time, that all the damage was done. You got Building 7. I mean, actually, Corbett Report has an amazing 4-minute speed clip that covers every, really suspicious fact about 9/11. And there's hundreds of them packed into that 4 minutes.
Okay, flat Earth.
Well, now this is obviously a very controversial one, and I normally avoid talking about it. What I would say is that, like with the other natural sciences, that many of the claims of cosmology are highly questionable, like that they can't know certain things, like, if, for example, the sun is as far away as they say from us, well, how do they know that? How can they measure it? Do they have, a tape measure that goes hundreds of millions of miles? So how many of the things that we assume are really, calculated theoretically rather than actually observed and measured? And, you mentioned the P1000. I would definitely encourage people to use that to look at some of the stars in the sky, observe them directly, and then look at cymatic patterns and tell me if you see any parallels. And that's certainly not what is in the textbooks.
Okay, Tartaria.
Well, I think Tartaria, speaks to a forgotten civilization, right? And I think it's definitely on maps. It's in history books, but we're not taught about it at all. But I think a lot of people who are researching this, the idea is that what we're told about history, especially the timelines, is not accurate. And look into Anatoly Fomenko's work, specifically about the timelines, and that things are covered up, like population resets. Why do we have similar architecture all over the world? All of that kind of stuff. How did these buildings get constructed so quickly? So I think there are more questions than answers. And I think most people have realized that it's not just the influence of a Tartarian culture, that there's more to it than that.
Did Epstein kill himself?
This one I have inside knowledge in a way, because I worked as a psychiatrist in several jails. And I'm an expert on correctional suicide, and even had patented a medical device to try and prevent that. And jails are quite paranoid of this. And if they have a high profile inmate they are going to bend over backwards to make sure that someone has eyeballs on that individual and there's no way they can carry out a suicide. Like in the jails I worked at, we took away people's clothes, reading materials, eyeglasses, toothbrush. They had direct 24-hour observation from, from a guard, and they had to wear a special like suicide smock that they couldn't wrap around their neck to hang themselves or anything like that. And I think it's the chances of a high profile guy like that committing suicide in Rikers Island is less than zero.
Wow. That's super interesting. With all the Epstein files coming out right now, that was a hot question right there. So that's super interesting. I don't think he's I think he's still alive somewhere, but that's a whole nother conspiracy. Okay, moving on. Michelle Obama is a man.
I'd say more likely than not.
If you saw the Ellen DeGeneres dance moves, there was something there. I don't know if you saw that or not, but that okay, last one here. We're going to start out. We have two more. Okay. Weather manipulation.
Well, we definitely, we talked about that. And so let me just say that with respect to like the recent cold snap and, ice storms in Texas that we have, I think it's difficult to find conclusive evidence that something like that is completely manipulated, or maybe it's a natural phenomenon that's augmented in some way. But I think that we can look at certain things that are fit in with strategies of land grabs and rezoning and things like that, but essentially geographical warfare, and talking about like the Maui fires, the LA fires, the freak hurricane in Asheville, North Carolina, and such. And I think there's very compelling evidence that those are, manipulated or primarily artificially caused weather events for, political and warfare means.
Mm. Like the Lahana, right?
Yeah, Lahaina. That's what I'm talking about at Maui. Yep.
Yeah. What's the deal with the blue roofs? The blue, everything blue, not destroyed.
Well, that I don't think that's fully conclusive, but they're definitely, depending if they're using some kind of specific technology, there's always ways to defeat a technology. So, could it be from, a color shield, right? If it's some kind of electromagnetic technology, absolutely, right? We know that lead shields X-rays, for example, right? And we know that light can be reflected or absorbed depending on the color of an object. So it's not that far off to see how that might be a realistic possibility.
Okay, last question. I'm going to give it to you. Do you want a Nephilim or Biden conspiracy?
Aren't they the same?
Very similar. Which one is it, Doc?
I'll go for the Biden.
Okay. Was it the real Biden, or was it a mask wearing Jim Carrey?
I've never heard that one about a mask wearing Jim Carrey, but look, you can find doppelgangers for anybody, right? And if someone in a very position with a lot of exposure is not competent to do their duties, but you want to keep their power, it would certainly make sense to use a doppelganger, right, to maintain appearances while whoever's really in charge is calling the shots. Right. I mean, there's an interesting conspiracy about Paul McCartney with respect to this as well.
Oh, yes. Because they said that the real Paul McCartney died.
Right. And he was replaced by, a double, a lookalike. And, the Beatles fit in this theme because if we look at, various researchers who have done a deep dive on this, the Tavistock Institute, using the Beatles as basically a tool of social programming. It's very, very compelling. The Sage of Quay, I think, is probably the leading authority. Mark Devlin has done some good work as well on this, and I'm sure a few others.
I would have laughed if someone said that to me until I was I was in Hawaii during the heat of COVID. We got asked to speak there at the Aloha Freedom Coalition, and Biden and his wife were there coincidentally at the same time with going around doing a vaccine campaign. Okay. And I was with the Aloha Freedom Coalition, and they went to the school to go protest Biden, and they followed him all around. And it was late at night, and Biden was with his security team, and the dude, Biden, sprinted like a 20-year-old man, and it was insane. They had it on video, and they tried to upload the video, and it was censored. And
like the same guy who was falling up the stairs to Air Force One.
Yes, like this dude barely walking, and then all of a sudden he starts sprinting. Now, the Aloha Freedom like people showed me this video. They said, "Look at this! We took this video, and he took off running."
Well, so maybe he got a shot of adrenochrome.
Maybe. And that was actually on my list of one of my conspiracies. Well, since you brought that up, let's bring that to the topic, especially with all the Epstein stuff, the adrenochrome industry. People think that's a conspiracy.
Well, I don't know specifically like about adrenochrome per se, but I'll tell you what I have found that may fit with that is that when a baby's born in the hospital, especially by C-section, it's more valuable, but the hospital actually sells the placenta, the umbilical cord, the cord blood. And we know that in a fetus that there are, elements that kind of have youthful properties. Like, for example, with cell cultures, right? If you're doing cell culture experiments, you're trying to grow mammalian cells, not bacterial cells. You're typically going to add fetal bovine serum to the cell culture, right? So, and they actually, go into pregnant cows, and they take that out of the fetus when the fetus is still in the womb, and they add that to the cell cultures because the cells in the cell cultures die without it. Mm. So it conveys certain properties. So this gets, the hospital takes ownership once they take it out, because on the consent form, there's special legal language that you will it to the hospital. And then they sell it for profit, and they sell it, who knows who they sell it to, right? Because it's all, it's not disclosed. We can only look at line items from accounting reports from hospitals to infer how much they're making from it, but we don't know exactly what it's used for or who's buying it. So what if they actually make it from a product like that, in some kind of secret operation, and you have to be a certified buyer in order to, get it. So it's certainly possible.
Yeah, super interesting. And that opens up a whole can of worms. But Doc, we are out of time. I want to give you the last plug here. Give us the last word of encouragement where people can find you. And if someone's listening to this, give them just your best health tip possible, Doc.
Well, that would be my best health tip, is to be your own health authority, because nature and your body and your spirit are the only things that can heal. And from virtually any health condition, you have the power to harness there. And so I encourage you to explore that further. If you want to learn my ways of bringing that about, then please go to my website at andrewkaufmanmd.com. There is a lot of free resources, my signature protocol, free master classes, and lots of other resources available to get you started.
Dr. Andrew Kaufman, thank you so much for your time today. People, if you're listening to this podcast, we'll have links to andrewkaufmanmd.com. You can go to support him. He's on this podcast for a reason, because I value what he has to say. Dr. Kaufman, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. Always enjoy speaking with you, my friend. You're a brother from another mother. Keep playing that guitar. I watch your videos, and I love that. Music is good therapy. It's good for the soul. And if you're listening to this podcast, please share this podcast far and wide. And I just want to give a shout out to Ezra Healing. Thank you for supporting this podcast. Go support Ezra Healing as well. And thank you, Doc.
My pleasure.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be, right, to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?